how is
Mhm.
Silent Hill 2 remake? Have you finished it, and how is it treating you?
Yep, I did finish it. It's it's very good.
Okay, okay,
I
that
enjoyed
was
it.
a scary hesitation there. You paused, rather
Yeah,
dramatic.
because I wanted to get my words right because it's not perfect. Definitely go into it knowing that, but
Sure.
it is. I think it's a very good modernization of the original game. Uh, they make new choices here and there in a variety of ways, from expanding areas, kind of shifting things around. Um, Obviously, the camera perspective is different. It's like a more third person kind of Resident Evil S camera versus the original, which had like pseudo fixed cameras for a lot of it.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of changes made here, but the broad strokes of everything, like the theming, the presentation, the kind of overall vibe, that stuff is all carried over relatively, unchanged, right?
Hmm.
Uh the combat has gotten a dramatic overhaul. Nobody really plays Silent Hill 2, the original, for the combat. It's not really like a combat heavy game.
How dare
It's
you?
there, but
How dare
like
you?
you're basically hitting things with a board and like occasionally shooting a gun. That's the combat, right? And so the remakes combat is definitely a lot more engaging than the original. This you still have like melee weapons and guns that you will find throughout the game, but it's a lot more up close and personal, I guess.
Hmm.
The camera animates in like kind of a very extreme way when you go in for melee attacks and when you dodge. And I saw somebody online, I forget who, but they kind of made a comparison to like how melee works in Last of Us. And once
Oh,
I
okay.
saw that, I was like, I can see that. So uh you know just kind of like a more dynamic, more visceral kind of melee sort of system.
Uh-huh.
And James is the main character. He gets a stomp move that is made it very reminiscent of like Dead Space, which
Hell
like he
yeah.
could stomp in the original, but like it's very like labored and an intense kind of stomping that you
Sure.
get to do against these horrific creatures in Silent Hill. Um, but yeah, it's I think it's very fun. It definitely takes a lot of cues from Resident Evil, specifically like Resident Evil 2 Remake, in that you're exploring an area, trying to solve puzzles and then getting into like combat encounters. And I'd say that there's a bit of resource management, but I was playing on normal throughout the whole game. And by the end of the game, I had like 25 of both type of healing items and like a ton of ammo. So if you're the type of person to kind of like fully
Horde.
explore your environment, like
Horde.
if you're playing on normal, you'll be loaded on stuff. It's very spooky. I'll
I was
I'll
gonna
say
say,
that.
is it actually like, did it? I mean, obviously, where it's Halloween time. Did it get you in
Mhm.
the spooky Halloween mood?
Yeah, it definitely scratches that itch. I'd say it's probably one of the better, like, if you're looking for a scary game to play right now, I'd probably say Silent Hill 2 Remake's a pretty good choice. It's because the thing is with Silent Hill and like the original Silent Hill 2, there's not a whole lot of like jump scares. It's definitely like a slow burn psychological horror, and like a lot of it's about like the vibe and like the feeling you get like exploring this town and these,
Sure.
decrepit environments. And you still get that throughout the remake, but they do kind of inject some elements that also give the occasional jump scare. So I will say, like, go into it knowing that, like, if you're, somebody that shies away from jump scares, it's not like every, 10 minutes or anything. Like, they spread them out pretty
But did
well,
they work on
at
you?
least for yeah, the like controlled developer placed ones, I guess I'll say.
Sure.
Um, there's this one enemy that really just kind of grinded my gears throughout the game because it's these mannequins, and like it's a set of mannequin legs, and then the top part is also a set of like inverted
Oh, I
mannequin
see.
legs.
Hmm.
So they look a little bit creepy, but they changed how these enemies work from the original. So in the original, they were kind of like similar to just the standard enemies where they'll like walk around and like hit you. But I should preface this by saying in Silent Hill, at least for Silent Hill 2, you find a radio, and the radio emits static when enemies are nearby. So like you can walk into like a completely pitch black room, and if your radio's going off, you're like, okay, there's probably something in here waiting for me. Um, the mannequins, they don't emit static unless they're moving like at you. So
Sure.
they
Okay.
they can like set up in a room and like freeze themselves, and they won't make any static until like you see them or whatever. But the mannequins in the remake, in addition to doing that, they also will play hide and seek with you basically, where like
Oh,
you can
damn.
see the enemy and then it'll just like walk into another room. And then you like kind of like walk into the room looking
Where did it
around, you got
go?
your flashlight up, and then you'll see it like hiding behind a corner, like a little bit of its leg is sticking out, or what often happens is they're like contorted in such a way where they're completely hidden, and then you round the corner and they jump at you and they hit you.
Dang.
So it's it's kind of like a jump scare, but it's also like
A bit
kind
more
of
organic.
dynamic in
Yeah.
that it's not where, they're not planting it there. It's just all based on the
Where you
AI of
are, and
these
yeah.
enemies.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
Um the lighting is like pretty incredible throughout. It's a very dark game at times. I think a little bit too dark in some situations. It's definitely one of those games where it's like your flashlight shows like 5 feet in front of you, and like,
Someone turn
you
on the
know,
damn lights.
exactly. They kind
Yeah.
of build stuff around that, but it's honestly that's the kind of vibe you want going through like a spooky game like this. Like I think you want it to be like kind of oppressively dark throughout.
Yeah.
And yeah, like overall, I had a lot of fun with it. It definitely feels like it's the atmosphere and the vibes of a Silent Hill game with like the gameplay of like Resident Evil, but not quite as actiony as Resident Evil. Like I don't want to say Resident Evil and think like
It's like
Resident
Resident
Evil
Evil
4 where
3
you're like knife parrying
or
and,
Resident Evil 4, yeah.
roundhouse kicking people. You're not really doing that. James isn't exactly that capable, but if you go into it thinking about like the broad strokes of how modern Resident Evil games work, this will feel very familiar to you.
I think that's kind of what
And
I think
yeah, go ahead.
that Resident Evil treatment is, I think, what Silent Hill needed. And, as someone who's been wanting to get into Silent Hill for so long, it's always been the thing of even like fans of the, and actually I don't remember if you said this to me specifically as well, but like I've heard, like, I've talked to people who are fans of Resident Evil, and I always get, oh yeah, I love Resident Evil, but like, or sorry, Jesus, I switched my topics. I love Silent Hill, but I wouldn't recommend playing them. Because it's just like, the old ones are just, they aged a little roughly perhaps, or and the is it the remasters or whatever that they came out with? Like I heard they're not optimal either.
The PS3 and 360 ones, yeah, they're famously botched
Yeah.
remasters.
So it's nice that we've gotten that kind of AAA treatment out of, quote unquote AAA. I mean, Bluebird Team is an indie team, and it's awesome that they're getting. Look, this is one of those crazy situations where I'm really happy that you said the game's really good, because it seemed that maybe not to the degree of Concord, but like from the get go, the cards were stacked against this game of like, there's no way Bluebird could pull this off. Like, like there's just,
Sure.
it was kind of that, it was an uphill battle for them right from the start. And so I'm glad that they were able to stick the landing and kind of prove themselves a
Mhm.
bit.
Which, to be fair, there was like anytime somebody's coming on the scene and is like, we're remaking one of the best games ever made, that's
Yes.
going to
Yeah.
cause
Yeah.
a lot of concern for people.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said before, like it's not perfect. I think there's definitely rough edges here with like the visuals. It's a really good looking game, but like things like reflections and like lighting around reflections looks a little bit janky. There's a couple spots when I played that, like the frame rate was a little bit inconsistent. I know they've been
Oh,
patching the game recently, so I'm not sure. I haven't been reading the patch notes, so I don't know if they're addressing specifically those kinds of things, but technically there's a little bit of rough edges, and if you are somebody that is intimately familiar with the original, while I said the broad strokes remain the same, there are some details and stuff that get either expanded on that weren't in the original or are like slightly reorganized or shifted around. And so you might prefer like certain ways that scenes were handled in the original versus the remake. That's kind of more of a subjective thing though. Like it's going to be hard to say whether or not, you know, you specifically will care about some of those things, but
hmm.
yeah, I mean, outside of those things, like it took me about 16 hours
Oh,
to
dang.
finish, which is yeah, essentially like twice as long as the original. I remember the original only took me like maybe 7 or 8 hours. So they definitely do expand a good bit of the locations. And I think the game could have maybe trimmed a little bit. There are some areas specifically that I think drag on a little bit too long and aren't really,
Sure.
introducing a whole lot of new stuff. But at the same time, it's like I was never really like actively not having fun while playing those. So
Hmm.
it's kind of one of those things where it's like I'm a little mixed on. It's like I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, but yeah, overall
Sure.
I think it's really good. I think if you're looking to get into Silent Hill and you want to play this remake, I say go for it. Um, Obviously, it would be nice if they could find a way to make like a nice port of the original so we could have both and people could play, both and see the differences for themselves. But yeah, I'd say if you're looking for something spooky to ring in the season, this is going to be a really good one to get your hands on.